So, good afternoon. My name is Jose. I work for People Ops at the Ethereum Foundation. I joined the Ethereum Foundation around 2 years ago. So, this has been an experiment. We didn't have people operations before I joined the EF. And I want to share with you some of the learnings that we got for the past 2 years. So what I'm going to talk today is our experience, as I said, for the past 2 years. I'll go through our challenges, positive aspects and learnings in both recruitment, people experience and development, and offboarding as well. And especially how these differ from other traditional organizations that exist in the field. But first, I will provide some context on why doing people operations at the F is a very particular challenge full of nuances. Mostly because of the way that the EF is organized. So the way that the EF is organized is, the EF is part of a much larger ecosystem. It is an organization that exists at the frontier of what we have known so far, one that supports a blockchain ecosystem without controlling it, and what that means is also a work in progress. So every day we get to learn more about what the EF is and what kind of organization it needs to be for the present and for the future to support, obviously, Ethereum's long-term growth. If we zoom in a little bit on how the EF relates to the ecosystem, the EF was new and we didn't know the best way for teams to organize themselves and to relate to the ecosystem. So we prioritized creating an environment where actually different teams could choose to organize themselves differently depending on the goals that they actually wanted to achieve, and they thought it was best for them to achieve those goals. So this resulted in having more like a community of teams than actual a set of typical company teams that are kind of standardized all across the board. There are multiple ways in how these teams interact with each other and with the other entities that form the Ethereum ecosystem. So there are teams that work at the frontier of the EF, there are teams that work within the EF, there are teams that work externally, there are teams that work with Ethereum ecosystem entities that are, again, at the frontier of the EF. So there are many ways in which these teams collaborate with one another and with the ecosystem. They're largely independent, as I said. Some of them are internally, some of them work at the frontier, so that is very important in talking about the way also moving forward on how people operations works for these teams. These teams are also largely autonomous, so they work in a decentralized way. They have a high degree of autonomy. Some decisions, such as, for example, roadmaps and priorities, are taken by these teams in consultation with leadership, but most of them are also made independently. Aside from some prescriptive decisions, such as, for example, legal matters, which obviously need to be complied with all across the board, there is quite a fair amount of leeway for teams to move around and to actually choose the setting, as I said, that are more suitable for them to help them achieve their own goals. So having said this, how does this actually impact people operations? In broad strokes, in traditional organizations, People Ops is kind of more structured and has more predictive outcomes. They aim to provide a consistent experience for all the teams within the same organization. At the EF, things are slightly different because these teams work independently and they kind of form their own culture internally. We aim to be as diverse as possible to make sure it works for everyone, but we kind of maintain the same minimum threshold to make sure that there's a minimum standard that all teams can meet. Talking a little bit about recruitment and going into People Ops directly. So as I mentioned before, teams are independent. So different teams mean different subcultures, mean a different way of working. So this means that working for a certain team at the EF can be substantially different than working for other team within the EF. This reflects on how they communicate internally, ranging from how to when to what platforms they use, compensation philosophy, way of working practices, interactions with the adjacent community, Ethereum community, etc. So what we learned from this is that the best way for people operations to actually facilitate the recruitment process is to let them lead the way. And we are actually helping and holding hands to let them do whatever they want to do, within obviously some limits, but using our expertise to help them achieve their own goals. So this can range from purely operational support. There are teams that get to us and say, hey, I know exactly who I want to hire because I have a very close relationship with the community that works around my team, and I want to hire that person, and I just need to set up the operational process of it, and that is fine. We can obviously help with that. There are other teams who are less sure about what the process looks like. So what they usually do is, okay, so I want to hire this kind of profile, which can be more or less defined, and then they kind of ask for our help for doing the process from end to end. So that goes from defining the profile, sourcing the candidate, establishing a hiring process, running the process, helping them run the interviews, until the offer. So it's fairly common for the EF to hire external contributors, as I said. This is also a very good way to lower the risk when we hire someone is, okay, if this person was an external contributor and was already contributing to the EF, as I said before, working at the frontier between the EF and the ecosystem, that obviously lowers the risk because we know that person from their past contributions, so it's easier to just bring them in, and we know that they will have a good fit within the organization. Another thing that we learned that is probably a challenge for us, that does not happen within traditional organizations, is that whenever we get a candidate that is a good candidate for a certain position within a team, it's much harder for us to share that profile with other teams because, as I said, teams work and hire largely independently. So we're not always aware of their hiring needs. So moving one profile from one team's pipeline to another team's pipeline can be substantially difficult. When we talk about people experience and their development, there is also a lot to say here. So because we are an unstructured, well, we're a structured organization, but we are a decentralized organization. And we are a flat organization, so we don't have job titles. In traditional organizations, it's easier for people to feel progression through changes in their job titles. So you know that when you go from junior something into senior something, there is a progression there. So you have somewhere to look for because maybe someone in the past also did that progression and now you have some kind of role model. Within the EF, that does not exist because, aside from a few exceptions, we don't have job titles. So it's much harder to be like a developer in the same team for 4 years, 5 years, and feel like you have a progression unless we put some measures in place. The good thing with this is that it opens the door to more unstructured learning paths. So you are actually free to take in the responsibilities that you want to take. Either those are within the current team that you're working for, or if those are also within another team that you're not working for, so you're free to collaborate with several teams within the EF if that is your goal. So we tend to focus more on contribution than actual career progression. Another challenge is that that provides a more unstructured path for people, which for some profiles out there and for some psychological profiles, that is not so easy to cope with. We've learned that, for example, a good way to tackle this career progression and this feeling of growth is through feedback rounds. So something that we have been working and experimenting with a few teams in the past is feedback rounds. So actually go around the team, including the team lead. We ask for some feedback, things that I did well, things that were a challenge for me in the past, and then we nudge the person to establish a few goals in which they would like to grow in the future and challenges that they would like to tackle, and we help them tackle those goals. So that can mean like they're working on a soft skill such as I want to communicate better, or they're working on a hard skill such as I want to learn certain language or work on certain topic of research or whatever. So that kind of conveys an unstructured sense of progression and growth, but it needs to be intrinsically owned by the person. It's not the EF that is going to define actually what the next step is. And finally, when we talk about offboarding, that is also somehow different at the EF than it is on traditional organizations. So as you might have guessed right now, the process is not the same. So we learned that, as I said before, the frontier between the EF and the ecosystem is very porous, and we want it to be like that. We wanted to keep it that way. We want to promote collaboration. We also need to adapt our working arrangements. So we need to make them as flexible as possible. People leaving is sometimes a net positive for the Ethereum Foundation and for the Ethereum community, because these people might leave, these people might go out to pursue their other projects in the ecosystem, and that obviously strengthens Ethereum's resilience. The challenge is that by making it as flexible as possible, we also reduce stability and predictability in people's paths within the EF. This is also a challenge that we're comfortable with taking, because for us it's much more important the contribution for Ethereum and for the Ethereum Foundation rather than the work arrangement per se that we have on paper. This is just a glimpse of some of the things that we learned in the past 2 years. We don't know what the future will hold. We are still learning. I think this is going to be a forever work in progress. People operations is fairly new at the EF. People operations is also, I dare to say, fairly new in Web3. We are still iterating, but what I know is that we have great people working both in the Ethereum Foundation and the ecosystem, as we were able to see for the past few days. We have a great team in people operations right now at the EF as well. And we will change as the EF and the Ethereum changes as well. We will keep on adapting and finding new ways to help people collaborate in different ways, with collaboration as a focus and in the center rather than typical working arrangements. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Jose, for the amazing talk. Now we can take some live questions here. Do you want to take the most upvoted one?
Yeah.
What is the one thing you thought needed changed within the EF, but then realized you were wrong?
Great question. So I remember at the beginning when we started doing people operations, one of the things that we started to approach was compensation philosophy and how should teams think about compensation. One thing that was clearly wrong was to give strict indications on how they should think about compensations. That is not something that all teams took very well, understandably, because as I said, all teams have different cultures and one team is very different than the next. So what we instead did was, okay, let's instead turn this into kind of a guideline to teach them how to think about compensation. We will not say, hey, you should think about an interval of compensation between this and that. Rather, you should think about how you want to approach compensation. Is location important to you? Is skill important to you? Is experience more important to you? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So choosing from a set of data points rather than just, getting salary bands or something like that worked much better for us.
Next question. How do you protect the culture of the EF with a decentralized approach?
That is also a great question. I feel like I'm very lucky to work in this place because this is a problem that kind of solves itself. One of the things that we do have at the Ethereum Foundation is alignment with Ethereum and alignment with the mission. I cannot think about anyone that works at the EF and at the ecosystem that is probably here present today that doesn't feel very strongly about how Ethereum should move forward or how Ethereum is good and the potential that it has to impact the society. So I actually I never felt the need to try to align everyone and try to protect the culture if things are super decentralized, because that is kind of a prerequisite when people kind of work in this space. So that work is definitely already kind of done compared to a traditional organization as well.
We're stretching on time right here. So number one lesson you would share with a new Web3 project that wants to work in a decentralized way when thinking about people ops?
Okay, 10 seconds to respond to this question. Test. Don't go super all in one solution, and test and iterate as much as possible. Go for the MVP, which is a word that many hate, but go for the MVP, test, go around. If it doesn't work, change and listen to people. I think that's one thing that we definitely learned, a meta learning in the middle of all this.
All right, thank you so much, Jose.